All right, I think I'm live here. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Meek. I'm the Senior Manager of Hot Glass Programs here at the Corning Museum of Glass. And we're here to talk to you today about some really amazing work that happened in the past couple of years leading up to the Dig Deeper exhibit. And that is the creation and use of a wood-fired furnace here at the Corning Museum of Glass. I wanted to start this off, of course, by thanking Kate Larson. I was looking through my emails, getting ready for this presentation, and the first email I have from Kate talking about this project was in 2018, and I know our conversation started even before then. So I just wanted to recognize Kate's efforts and the incredible institution that we're all fortunate enough to work at that supports ideas like this and hands-on learning like this. Before we introduce the panel and before we start to talk about the wood-fired furnace, I thought it would be wonderful to share some of the other work of our talented colleagues here. And that is a really lovely video that we've posted on YouTube and that we've used, which highlights just some of the really beautiful ambient scenes of the wood-fired furnace. So before we kick off on our panel discussion and our presentation here, I just wanted to share this video with you all. All right. Yeah, sorry, no sound. I guess that's the enticement to check out our YouTube page, where that video is available with sound and a lot of other pieces that were put together by our amazing digital team here. So at this time, I think the rest of the panelists here are able to join me. I know Catherine was having, oh, there's Catherine too. Excellent. So again, my name is Eric Meek, and I'm really proud to introduce the team who worked on this. So these the folks here are all part of the Hot Glass Programs team, including Jeff Mack, who is our manager of Hot Glass Programs, Jesse Rasid, who leads our technical team, and one of our master craftspeople, Catherine, who is a gaffer here at the Corning Museum of Glass, a full-time glassmaker. So everyone, thank you guys for joining me today. It's good to see y'all.
Thank you.
Good to be here.
You too.
All right. So what we wanted to do in this presentation is just to talk a little bit about our discoveries along the way of creating this furnace. And let me see if I have control of the deck here. There they are. Okay. So making glass out of a wood-fired furnace, I think, is a dream of every glassmaker. And the other thing I'll say, just to start off this conversation, is that the four of us are all glassmakers, right? And so making glass out of a wood-fired furnace, I think, is something that all of us dream of, especially being around all of the objects here at the Corning Museum of Glass. So we have glass objects which span thousands of years of history, and you know that a large number of those pieces were made in a furnace which primary fuel source was wood. Of course, you know, as contemporary glassmakers, you don't really have that opportunity. But here at the Corning Museum of Glass, we've been curious about this. Of course, the guests here at the museum ask us about it all the time. And so starting over 15 years ago, we were utilizing the resources of a local community college, the Corning Community College, which has a great ceramics program. And we actually just wanted to see what would happen if we melted glass in one of their wood-fired kilns. So these are ceramic kilns. And so here you can see some images of us working at those furnaces quite a few years ago, just to do it, you know, just to see what it was like, see how it was different from working out of a gas furnace. The other thing I'll say, just as a primer to this conversation, is that we have to make sure we give our thanks to Mark Taylor and David Hill, who are really pioneers in this field. And I'm sure they've been discussed in this seminar already. But Mark and David really have been the leading practitioners and the folks who have led the way in the research of replicating not only objects made in ancient times, but also trying to figure out how they were made in the most practical way possible, which is by recreating the circumstances. So we work closely, especially Jesse worked very, very closely with Mark and David, and they provided a wealth of information for us to start from. So I think, you know, knowing that Mark and David have done this, there was a discussion even in our museum, well, why should we do it? Why should we also do it? And fortunately, Kate and Carol and the institution quickly supported us in doing it here too, not because we wanted to do it different or better, but just because we wanted to do it too, and we wanted to do the process from the beginning all the way through to the end, just to see what information we could glean and what we could learn, primarily what we could learn about the conditions that glassmakers worked in ancient times. And that's something that I felt strongly that by doing it ourselves, we would learn more than by talking to Mark and David or observing them. And of course, that came to be true. Mark and David have done wonderful work. They've done a number of generations of these wood-fired kilns, wood-fired furnaces. And as I said, they were incredibly, incredibly generous in sharing their knowledge to help us be successful. The crafting of the furnace, the making of the furnace, this was primarily Jesse's task. So Jesse, I remember talking in your job interview, coming to the museum here about this project. And so Jesse started with us in 2022, right?
Yep.
Yep. And This was the very, very first project that you started on. So Jesse, we're going to walk through in these first couple of slides the process of making that first wood-fired furnace. So just tell us about what's happening in this slide here.
So yeah, in this slide, we're shredding the straw. So right when I first started working here at the museum, immediately I got into contact with Mark and David, and they very generously shared their recipe for daub. Daub is a mixture of clay and straw, and so they gave us their recipe and told us how they went about making it. And so our first thing was to procure some straw, and here you can see we're using this B40 straw blower, which was quite the overkill to shred up 3 bales of hay. And so this was our first step. We had to get all this straw shredded up, and then we had to get our clay. And so we linked up with Alfred University's ceramics department, and we got some refired clay. And this came to us dry, so we had to rehydrate it by weight. And so we weighed out all of our clay, and then we added, we basically doubled the amount of water that we needed, because we had to make this clay absorb all this water and then some extra, because to mix in the straw, you had to actually make your clay even thinner than it's supposed to be. And then next slide. You can see we've on the left, we mixed all of our straw in. So this was a pretty big task, and it was very, very messy, much messier than I expected it to be. And the clay was very wet at this point. So for the first 3 days, we pulled this daub out, and we spread it actually on the floor in our workshop, and let a lot of the water seep out of it. And then once the water came out a bit, we packed it into 5-gallon buckets. And on the bucket on the right, you can see there's a hole punched down through the center of all of that daub. And that was something that I figured out really early on, was that the one of the biggest factors in being able to build the furnace was moisture control with the daub. And so we couldn't have it get too dry, we couldn't have it get too wet. And so we sort of had this whole Goldilocks thing going on, where we needed to get a lot of the water out of the clay. And so I found that by pushing my arm down through the center of the bucket, I could get water to seep out into the center section there, and then I could pour it off every morning. So we had about 900 pounds of this clay in buckets. And so from there, we designed our own furnace. And so we based it off of Mark and David's work, but we also, we wanted to come up with our own design. And so that's me drawing this up. And from there,
Jesse, I do think, it's important to recognize too that, Mark and David had made these furnaces, but obviously at Villeborg and places around mostly Europe, a lot of people have been experimenting with different designs. And when we were approaching the design of this, there were some practical things that we had in mind that would make it particularly well suited for our goals, which were to recreate objects and then also to capture some of the footage. So there were some design decisions for the furnace that were based on our specific needs, I believe, too.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the great things about building with daub, I think one of the things I came to think of as we were going through this process is that daub must have been like the 2x4 of the ancient world, right? Probably there was a daub guy in every town, and it was a known material that a lot of people could work with. And I think that might be one of the things that helped spread glass around the ancient world. The fact that these furnaces were relatively easy to make, I think.
Yeah,
I mean, we had a lot to learn, but I think relatively easy to make.
So so here we've started construction, and so the learning curve on this was really steep. We were sort of figuring it out as we went. We had notes, and we had some information but really, and sort of the root of the whole project is that you don't really know until you try something. And so we were flying blind and building this. And you can see, I figured out really quickly that I could only build a certain amount a day, because if I tried to get greedy and build too much furnace, the moisture in the daub would not support its own weight. And so it would start slumping, and it would sort of fall out on itself or slump down and thicken back up against the ground. And so you can see we started building, and it basically was built like a coil pot. We started at the bottom and worked our way up, and we would cover it because we didn't want the whole thing to dry until we were done with construction. And you can see we made some foam inserts to hold the negative spaces, our future doorways, and pipe warmers and stoke tunnels.
And this is all happening in the middle of winter here in Corning. So this is in February. And I think one of the clever things that Jesse did was to build this whole thing on a pallet, so that then we could take it into place when we were going to fire it. So
yeah,
it was definitely not built on site.
Yeah, we built this on a pallet and then on a layer of high temperature bricks, so that we could just roll it into place and be able to fire it up.
Right, and there were a couple of instances where we, again, we weren't going for a replica of a Roman furnace. We wanted to replicate the sort of scale and the approachability and the fuel usage and things like that. But we used some other modern materials too. Can you talk about those three little holes in the side of the furnace there?
Sure thing. So the keyed holes down below the large openings on the side of the furnace, traditionally what they probably used were metal rods to as a shelf to hold the crucibles inside the furnace. Just by happenstance, when we were up at the local community college ceramics department, they had a bunch of these silicon carbide bars, and they were just something that somebody had grabbed, and there was an abundance of them up there. And so we asked if we could have a dozen of them, and they turned out to be just perfect. They were the perfect bar. They had a nice flat side to them. They were good to high temperatures and wouldn't slump, unlike metal. And so we immediately changed the design to take these keyway openings, and we were able to slide our silicon carbide shelf supports across in there.
Right,
So
and just to add a little more detail to that, I mean, you can kind of see it in the image on the left there, and that's where the pots of glass would sit, and below that would be the coal bed and the fire. And the other thing I wanted to mention is that one of our technicians, Tom Ryder, actually slip cast our own pots to use. So the little crucibles that held the molten glass were slip cast porcelain, which worked tremendously well too.
yeah, those worked spectacular.
Okay, so here's the image of us kindling our newly made, beautifully crafted furnace. Just starting a little fire in it. So once we got to the point of building a fire in this, Jesse, what can you tell me about, what did you expect in terms of heat up? How long did it take to heat up and things like that?
So this is our very first firing, and so you can see it's just a very small amount of wood. We had to figure out how this operated, this furnace. We didn't know, and so I suspected, because it was such a big heavy thing, that it would take a really long time to come up to temperature. And so we tried to baby it up and come up slowly. But what we discovered was that we put a little too much wood in the very first time, and it shot right up to almost 1,000 degrees in the first hour and a half. And we discovered that it did that every time. It just it would come right up. It was incredibly efficient, surprisingly efficient. It was unexpected, to say.
And that made us a little nervous, right? Because we know that, if the dog was still somewhat, it still had some moisture in it, that rapid temperature change could cause cracks, which inevitably happened anyway, but we always did want to try to control that ramp up to maintain the structure of the furnace as long as we could.
It was scary. It certainly was scary.
So Jeff, turning to programming, can you tell us about the work that the hot glass team was doing as this furnace was being built to prepare, to be part of the Dig Deeper exhibit?
Yep. So what we had to do was prepare to work at a different scale, prepare to work in a different style. Jesse was busy building the furnace, and the glass blowers who were going to be participating, because one of the main goals was to capture some footage of us making glass for the Dig Deeper exhibition to help support that. So we wanted to learn about this stuff. So we actually, Bill Gudenrath generously gave of his time and demonstrated a lot of the techniques that they used for folding feet and making folds in glass, and just typical ancient glass blowing techniques. And we were practicing these in the amphitheater at the regular furnace. And we even did setups where we could try it on a chair, rolling it on our laps and things like that. It was very clumsy. And we had a lot of discoveries to make before we even really started playing around with this furnace. So Catherine Ayers, Chris Rochelle, myself, and some of the other team really practice some of the forms of the glass that would have typically been made at Jalam, or that's theoretically made at Jalam. Apparently, there's very little intact glass that was found at Jalam because it was a factory. So everything they were making, was shipped off. And most of what was left on the site at the factory would be shards and scraps and things like that. So in the region, there's a lot of different pieces that would have emulated the style of work that would have been made at Jalam based on some of the shards found there. And those were some of the shapes and forms and techniques that we were practicing before we even got to play with the wood fire furnace.
So what you can see here actually is that we've taken, and as Jeff was saying, we were practicing these forms in our studio here at the Corning Museum of Glass, which we call the amphitheater, and we've taken our bench and our tools out to this ancient furnace, and that's, I think, what's well represented in this image, and that is that we're taking what we know about glass making and how we do it today, and we're sort of imposing it upon this ancient furnace. So Catherine, can you just talk about the experience of working at this ancient furnace on this bench and approaching it the way that you approach glass as a modern glassmaker?
So when we first started practicing working out of the wood-fired furnace, we had the bench, as you can see in the picture, and it's completely different than what we're working with in our modern day shop. In the modern day shop, you're walking to the furnace, walking back to the bench, and there's a lot of movement, a lot of getting up and getting down. And so with this wood-fired furnace, it's a much smaller scale, and you're sitting right in front of the furnace. They typically worked right in front of the furnace, and everything was in arm's reach. And so we had to experiment with different size pipes, shorter pipes, because we were, sitting and then flipping the pipe around and then reaching into the furnace to gather the glass. And so there was a lot of working and then trying to think of, well, how would they have done this? And they might have needed maybe a shorter pipe, or everything needed to be very close, tight.
And as Jeff was saying, when we tried to work in what we thought would have been the style of ancient glassmakers in our contemporary shop, it was clumsy. Working at a chair, rolling on your legs, sitting right in front of the furnace. In our modern shop, that was horribly clumsy and awkward. But then this is an image of Catherine working at the furnace, and she's rolling the pipe on her leg, and she's situated very, very close in proximity to the furnace. And so, Catherine, tell us what shifted. So, tell me how that felt different working at this ancient furnace.
The height of the furnace. So in our modern day furnace, it's waist high, and you're much higher. So this beautiful little furnace that Jesse built was much lower to the ground, and it made sense to sit right in front of it. And you could actually, from where you were sitting, you could see down into the furnace, see the pot, see the glass. And so it just made sense to get rid of that bench like they
And-
would have done and work in your lab.
And it all kind of made sense, right? And I think that was one of the wonderful things that we had and our whole team was able to experience, is that this way of working that was awkward in the modern shop just felt natural, and it made sense when we were working at this little furnace. There's a question that came in, and it was asking about, was it uncomfortably hot working near the furnace? Did we have to worry about smoke and things like that? And I can see Catherine shaking her head no. And the only thing I'll say is something that I shared with a lot of people, and that this little furnace was friendly. You know, our modern gas furnaces, you know, they're aggressive and they're intimidating. But this little furnace with those, you know, the beautiful wafts of flame coming off of it, it was kind of friendly, and it wasn't intimidating or uncomfortable to sit in this proximity. At least that was my experience, Catherine.
Yeah, it was actually very peaceful. It was, you know, you hear the crack, instead of the blowers from the big furnace, you hear crackling of the fire. You could feel the breeze, and there was some smoke, just like a bonfire, but not terrible. And it was very peaceful.
It
depended
was
which way
nicer
you
than sitting
do it.
in front of an open fire roasting your hot dog, right? Because you know, at least you have this containment of that heat.
Right.
And that was one of the cool things, is that we witnessed when we were doing this little campfire here, and just like any other campfire, this drew interest. So there are office buildings that are surrounding this lot where we were working, and even colleagues from the museum, they just came out of the woodwork to check out what we were doing and to gather around this you know, this lovely little furnace and this unique thing that was happening at the museum. And that really sort of informed where we went from here. I have a few more images to share of us working out of this furnace. Another unique attribute of this furnace is that you're reheating directly over your pot of glass. So you can kind of see it here, but just underneath, just inside of that opening, there's the pot of glass, the crucible of glass that you gather out of. And that is also unusual in a modern day furnace setup, where you can gather and work, and that facilitated this sort of solo work where you can gather with one hand, apply a bit or a handle while you're keeping the piece hot in the other hand. So it all just kind of made sense, and that was one of the great discoveries about doing this, of things that made sense. So Jeff, I know you mentioned earlier on that one of the goals of this project was to make sense of the Jalam site. So can you talk about other ways that working out of this furnace sort of informed some of the shards and bits and scraps and things that Kate showed us from the Jalam site?
Most certainly. Again, we had a lot of time to practice, and one part of our sort of discovery process before we even got to working with the furnace was meeting with Kate and looking at shards from Jalam, looking at pieces that had the folds in them, little feet that are broken off of things. We also got to see some complete objects, as well as a lot of the scraps from the site, from the factory site. So from the workstations and the dump bins and the things like that. So there's a lot of little tadpole looking things, and there's like these crazy double folds. So once we started working with the furnace, you know, we noticed that we were making a lot of the same looking shards as what we were handling and looking at early on in the process, when we were looking at actually the ancient shards of glass from Jalam. And so, you know, there was like a couple moments where, you know, we played around with a fold and we made a double fold. And, you know, Kate recognized that as, hey, you know, that's an interesting technique that we see in some of these ancient pieces and shards. And it's really, so we were discovering things as we were working with this furnace, right, almost from the get-go. You know, Kate noticed us pulling little pieces of carbon out of the glass, because since it's wood fire, you know, pieces of carbon and ash land on the surface of the glass, or there's pieces of the daub, because it's a more brittle refractory than what we use nowadays. It would fall into the crucible, and we'd gather it up, and there'd be little chunks that the first thing we would do, we would pull little pieces out of the glass and cast them off. And this was making these tadpoles that looked exactly like what was coming out of the Jalam workshop, you know, 2,000 years ago. So
And
that was
here's
kind of an exciting development to to actually be discovering things, even though other people have done this, to have cool realizations and aha moments, with the archaeologist who's in charge of it. And that was a lot of fun.
And again, this was really the goal, and what you see in this slide here is that we wanted to capture it, and we wanted to share it with all of the guests and visitors who saw the Dig Deeper exhibit. So here is Brad and Alexis, our amazing digital team, videographers, movie makers, capturing some of the things that were happening. We did this in 2 campaigns. We had a proof of concept where we fired the furnace in June of 2022, and then in September, so that fall, we had the session where we actually filmed what was happening. And so we had that time to test the furnace and to make sure everything was working right. You can see even Kate got in on the action and was able to work out of this great little furnace a little bit too. So and that this all led to this amazing opportunity to share footage of what we experienced and what we learned for the guests of the Dig Deeper show. I had to share this. This is a picture, and I'm blowing glass in the background there, so near and dear to my heart. There was a question that came in, and Jesse, this is probably a good one for you. How much glass could we melt in a day, and about how many objects would that equate to? And just remember that we didn't make this as a capacity furnace, but just with what we had, how much could we make a day?
So with the crucibles that Tom Ryder made, each one of those held about 22 pounds of glass. And so we would have 2 of those side by side. We would have one with some sort of a copper blue type glass. And then the other one had a iron green with some black iron oxide in it. And so we had 2 different pots in there, and it was 22 pounds each. As far as how many pieces we made, I don't know. We could
work a day. Everybody, I mean, for the campaign, it took a couple hours to heat the furnace up, and then we would work for a couple of hours. So we'd usually wind up working from maybe 11 until 4 o'clock. And there was plenty of glass. By the time we were done, we were getting through it. But we easily could have made a larger capacity pot, I think. And the other thing is that the glass melted pretty quickly, and we weren't going for super high quality. So I think we could have topped up the furnaces too, if we had chosen to. Just very quickly, I wanted to touch on the sort of afterlife of our little wood-fired furnace. So we had a complimentary exhibit happening over the span of Dig Deeper, which talked about fuel use in glass making. Called Get Stoked, and so we put our furnace on display for the span of the Dig Deeper exhibit, and we talked about the use of fuel. We've calculated that we used about 1/3 of a cord of wood per day when we were working glass out of this furnace. So 3 days, a cord of wood is quite a lot for 3 days. But then we also have the opportunity here at the museum to run one of our electric furnaces on renewable energy. And so that's really an exciting development in glass making. I want to take the last part of our presentation to talk about the evolution of the project and the Gen 2 wood-fired furnace. So we only have about 5 more minutes to talk about this, Jesse, but I did want to say that, from our experience in working out of this furnace and seeing how intrigued people were by it, we then decided to do this as public programming for the summer of 2023. So we worked out of the wood-fired furnace once a week, every day over the summer. So that furnace had a little bit of a different design approach. So Jesse, we're going to shoot through these, but can you talk about the design approach for this Gen 2
Sure.
Wood-fired furnace?
So for the second generation of furnace, we couldn't hand build. We weren't able to use a daub type material. We had to use modern castable refractory so that it held up a little better to the multiple firings. We went up and down a dozen times, and the original furnace immediately was cracking and was very, very fragile by the end. So you can see our modern design has interlocking sides, which I had a eureka moment looking out in the yard one day and seeing one of my kids' plastic toys out there. And so we had to cast all of our different pieces. And so we had to make forms. and some of them were pretty complex. This is the face with the sills and the door cutaways. And then we use the same silicon carbide shelf supports. And here we are with some of the stoke tunnel is on the right up on the top, and various sides and fronts cast. And we did our first assemblage here, and we tested it, and it fit and it worked. It didn't fall in on itself, and it also wouldn't fall out and apart. And so here's what it looks like just bare. So this modern material was stronger, and it held up to the temperature better, but it was actually less insulative than the Daub. And so we wrapped it in fiber blanket and then used a mixture of plaster and sand to make a 3/4 to 1 inch thick shell over that, which actually lent itself to the appearance of it. And so here I am stoking.
Yeah, so, you know, it was just impractical to use a Daub furnace for programming weekly over the summer. And it was just a testament to Jesse's creative thinking and to be able to share this wonderful experience with our guests, but do it in a way that is sustainable and makes sense for us as the practitioners of the project. So Jesse, here, you know, is a good shot of you stoking the furnace and the wood. Just give us the highlights of what kind of wood we used, like what was stoking like tell us about the relationship between you in this picture, the stoker, and the person working glass.
So stoking turned out to be a lot more important than we initially imagined. The stoker was as important as the glass blower. And so we would stoke, we burned ash because locally we have the ash borer. And so there's a lot of abundance of ash, and it burned very hot, and it doesn't have to be fully seasoned to burn hot. And so you can see we have a lot of ash here in the picture. And so we developed a sort of funny rhythm with the glass blowers where the stoker would load up the furnace before the piece, give it about 5 minutes to burn out a little bit and not be so rich. And then the glass blower was sort of off to the races and would start blowing the piece. They'd take their first gather. And you can see there's an abundance of flame in these pictures. There's a lot of smoke. It was awesome.
So Catherine, this is kind of right after a stoke. So, you know, after Jesse's stoked, tell us what you could do and what you couldn't do as a glassmaker during this phase. And this phase lasted probably 30 seconds, and we were stoking about every 10 minutes or so.
Yeah, so once he started stoking, the smoke would, you know, the flames would be coming out of, there was a reduction flame, the flames were coming out of the front, and you'd pull your piece from the furnace and there would be a thin layer of carbon on it. When it had that thin layer of carbon on it, you couldn't stick handles, you couldn't stick your punty to the glass. You had to time it. You'd start the piece, and by the time you got to the punty, we'd punty, then stoke again. And so we had to develop this rhythm with the stoker, and I think it was every 15 minutes we were throwing in a few logs.
Yeah, every 12 to 14. And what would happen is we would have around peak temperatures of like 2050 Fahrenheit. And by the time you got to the point where you were about to punty, the temperature would be down in the 1800s. And so it would feel very cold, and you would feel a little bit frantic, like, oh, we got to hurry up and punty. And we would get that punty stuck on. And then as a stoker, we would throw smaller pieces, a whole bunch of smaller pieces. So we got a real bright flare up of heat and fire, but not a ton of reduction. We didn't want it to have too much smoke. And so we would throw a bunch of small pieces in and then hopefully finish the piece.
And I think a fun thing to sort of wrap the conversation up is hearing what each of your sort of primary learning was. So Jeff, from a glassmaking perspective, what's the one thing that stands out to you looking back on this project? You're just like, wow, I learned this. I didn't know it before I started this project.
I think it to me, it kind of reinforced the elegance of simplicity in how well the furnace worked. And it also reinforced for me the lesson of patience in glassmaking. and teamwork. You know, the stoker really did become a part of the team. So it was like a whole new, it was just a whole new way of making glass. But it, you know, and it to me, it just kind of connected me. For me personally, it was a real treat to do it. Not necessarily learning something about the glass, but just being able to kind of connect to my predecessors in this field and, you know, walk a mile in an ancient glassblower's shoes with a wood fire furnace, and, you know, see that you know, there were some exceptional challenges. You can see in our second version, you know, when we were doing public programming, you can see Chris on the left there. He's got a little miniature bench that Tom and Jesse built because it was kind of challenging to learn to blow glass on your rolling it back and forth on your lap. And you know, that, I mean, that is a real skill. Like, they had specialized skills that we no longer have as glass makers in making the glass this way. So that's kind of always an interesting discovery, is finding out, you know, that just because we're more modern, it doesn't necessarily mean we know more than ancient people did.
Well, and during our summer program too, we wanted to make sure that working on this bench was accessible to a broader range of our glassmaking team and even glassmakers in the community. And so it was a decision to bring back the bench rails. Catherine, how about you? Any lessons that really lingered with you?
I remember one of the first days when we went back to curatorial and we're looking at the pieces from the site, and there was that piece with the zigzag stripe, and it was, how did they do that? How did they get those points so sharp? And then, you know, working with Bill and practicing, you know, adding those bits yourself, it kind of just happened. I was thinking maybe they, you know, took a hook and dragged that sharp point up, but it was just the weight of the material and gathering it and bringing it yourself and doing it.
Dynamics of that special situation that we created here, that Jesse created. Jesse, any closing thoughts from you?
I loved the little furnace. I loved the whole project. It was just awesome. I loved it. It was so fun.
There's a question that came in about, you know, do we feel ancient glassmakers would have had to have developed that same rhythm with stoking and working? And yeah, I think absolutely. I think you know, you have a finite amount of time that you have that peak heat, that sweet spot, you know, and you know, our furnaces, the temperature is like this, but the furnace, you know, the wood-fired furnace, the temperature went like this. And I think in ancient times, you know, that wave might have been longer and the peaks and valleys might have been lower because they optimized it, of course, but they still would have had to deal with that. So I definitely think that would have been part of it. I mean, we're almost at time. We have about 1 minute and 30 seconds. But Kate also mentioned there's nothing after us. So I did want to open it up if anybody wanted to share any other questions. We've got some great questions here coming in on the chat line. I don't know if people are able to speak or raise their hand or anything, but we'd certainly love to answer any questions if anybody has any others. But we certainly appreciate your engagement today, and it's a little humble to be here knowing that so many people have done this before and done it so well. So I don't want to present that we're pioneering anything here, but just the fact that we were able to experience it ourselves and do it here and contribute to the greater knowledge of glass. We're grateful for that opportunity. Excellent. So thanks everyone for your kind feedback. And Kate, as Kate appears, thank you again for the opportunity.
Oh, thank you all. It was such a privilege to work with all of you and see all of this kind of come to life. And I think it was a fun project. Like, we just had fun, and that's not something that you often get to say at work. So thank you all for being here and sharing your perspectives and experience on this. It was really great. So it is now my job to sadly and regretfully wrap up our seminar. It's been such a wonderful 2 days of discussions and presentations, and I want to thank all of our speakers and panelists, presenters, our session hosts and moderators for contributing their time and their expertise and sharing with us. As Carol White, our executive director, is very fond of saying, it takes a village to do these things. And so I especially want to thank all the technical support who's been with us all along behind the scenes. You haven't seen them, but they've been there solving all kinds of issues. So yes, thank you. Zoom hand claps to Scott Ignashevsky, Taylor Morse, Dan Paquette, Amy Hughes, Brady Spalding, and Emily Smith. Thank you for being here and doing all that you have done to make this such a great program and such a successful one. So recorded presentations, if you missed anything, will be available through the Zoom platform for the next couple weeks. And then we will be posting these publicly on YouTube within the next couple weeks as well. So please do distribute them and disseminate them to your colleagues if you found them useful. We do publish an open access proceedings of our annual seminar. The most recent available is from the 59th annual seminar on Sparkling Company, which is available under the museum publications section of the Corning Museum of Glass website. The 60th and now the 61st annual seminar will be in preparation. So tomorrow you'll receive a short survey from the museum. So please do take, just a couple of minutes to complete it so that we can continue to offer and improve our program. And finally, planning is already underway for the 62nd annual seminar on glass, which will be held this fall. And I can give you a little sneak preview. The topic will be glass and fragrance across time and place. So thank you again to everyone for being here. Have a great rest of your day and take care.